Great. I could not see the live icon. I apologize for all of you there. So as we've ready in 3, 2. Hi, everyone. You know, psychedelics have become the new buzzword all over the internet and all over the medical community. I'm sorry about that, guys. I am thrown off, but that's what happens with live TV, right? Here we go. I'm going to try this one more time. All right. As we're hearing psychedelics more and more around the world, right, we're hearing also the term medicinal use, and the comparisons to the cannabis industry become apparent, right? But I think a lot of people are misinterpreting some of the similarities. And today's guest talks about the importance of destigmatizing the medicinal use of these psychedelic compounds for those people who can really benefit from those uses. And so we ask the question, what can psychedelics learn from the cannabis industry? Please help me welcome Livi McKay of MyTEPI. Hello, Livi. Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me, Margaret.
Right. I mean, hey, I think it's one of those days we, have some technical difficulties, right?
Yes.
The point is, I think I have a feeling that usually happens when the conversations are just so important, and it's usually information that will really start to shift some minds. So thank you for bearing with us through all of that.
Absolutely, on both sides.
Totally. Well, again, like I mentioned, today's question is one that has been popping up all over the industry, right? What can we learn as the psychedelic community from the cannabis industry? But most of those conversations really are focused upon, the path to legalization, the monetization methods, the distribution channels. But deeper than that is this healing, right? The true purpose of what most of these psychedelic compounds, and when there's so many of us fighting for the legalization of those compounds and free use of those compounds, are to help people. And when these questions, and when I knew I wanted to take that slant, you became the perfect guest. Knowing about your story and your journey into the cannabis industry, and really where you started and what took you there, I knew that you'd be able to shift some minds around that. And so if you wouldn't, I'd love to start there. When you hear that question, what can psychedelics learn from the cannabis industry? What's the first thing that pops in your mind?
You really nailed the major crux of it, and that's the health and wellness side. That is what comes to my mind, because as you alluded to, my entry into cannabis was one of kind of the hardest path possible, kicking and screaming through personal needs and serious medical indications, physical medical indications, and including grand mal seizures and multiple surgeries that resulted in opioid dependence and so forth, and chronic pain. And so cannabis was something that helped break me away from all of those things. But when I was growing up, if you can hear my accent, I'm from the deep South. I'm from Alabama. And so I grew up thinking that cannabis was something that made you lazy, it made you stupid, and it was a dirty street drug. And when you talk about psychedelics, that's just cannabis is what I thought. So psychedelics, I thought, were, those were for hippies and rock stars and for the fringest of fringe, and absolutely no medicinal use. So that was where I really started out. I would say the first half of my life, or, more than half of my life, and only in my later 20s and to understand that it is all about the medicinal use. But what I think my story kind of sheds lights on is I'm not alone in this. So many other people come from this angle and look at these as drugs, and something in drugs with no medicinal value. And if you claim a medicinal value, it's an excuse to use that drug. And so there is this heavy, heavy stigma around it. And so when you ask the question, what can psychedelics learn from cannabis, as an industry, cannabis has had a little bit longer and a little bit more maturity, a little bit more infrastructure into it. But where I think it's where you look at, obviously, their mistakes. And so I think right out the gate, one of the biggest things that they can learn is you've got to put more emphasis on health and wellness, on the beneficial uses, and if no emphasis, frankly, on recreational use, even if you find it fine, even if you're morally okay with this, even it's something that's such a hurdle to jump over. And as long as it's go the path of least resistance and the path that actually matters the most. And that's the health and wellness side. And as long as you're trying to make people okay with recreational drug use, whether that's cannabis or that's psychedelics, which virtually I think that they should be in the same category, but that's a whole nother discussion. But I do think they should be in the same category. I think that the wellness side needs to be the discussion, and we need to have a much more nuanced discussion on what that actually means.
Yeah, I 100% agree. The reality is that there's a sad epidemic going on. And I took that from the Mind Army. And, they're saying it's suicide, anxiety, addiction, depression, and it's sweeping across, right, the nation. And there's medicinal plants out there that are being withheld, right, for what the status quo is in treatment. And I saw one of your interviews, where you said, hey, it's a legal addiction.
Yes.
But an illegal, did you say cure or treatment,
solution. And it's an illegal solution. Yes.
And isn't that the case that, you talk about the stigma around it and saying, that, hey, there's no medicinal use for these kind of illicit drugs like marijuana and psychedelics. But then the ones that are approved are the ones that are the most addictive, do the most destruction to our bodies, to the people around us, to, our livelihoods. And so, I love your story, and hopefully you can share a little bit of the details from you going, you alluded to, you're down in the deep South, Alabama. I want to give a little bit away. You said, your dad is a physician that's saying, absolutely not, this is your brain on drugs type of, character. And, and then you have a prosecutor for the Drug Enforcement Agency as a mother, so when you talk about highly stigmatized around, the misuse of drugs, right? And the miscategorization. And that's where I want a lot of the mind shifts to happen, is that when we start to shift the container in which we use these compounds, whether it's cannabis, and we shift the mindset, like not from an escape or, a Saturday night let loose, to saying, hey, I have an intention of breaking myself off of a dependency or relieving pain, relieving my anxiety and depression. Talk to us how you came from someone that was brought up into that to then saying, hey, I've tried everything else. I've ran the gamut. I've taken all the pills. I've done all the exercises. And yet this is where I found healing.
Yes. And you did do such a great job. So yeah, I had my mother and father, and just to make matters worse, but it's also a little funny, my parents' names are Barbie and Ken. I'm not joking.
I thought you were making that up.
No, I'm dead serious. They're Barbie and Ken, a doctor and a lawyer, and deep South conservative Christians. Exactly what you think. So yeah. I grew up exactly how you think. Very, very against this. And it was when I got to college, and I started to kind of open my mind up a little bit, as I think almost all of us do in college. And I, of course, I just met people that were using cannabis, smoking weed around me. And I was like, oh, you guys are in honors college. Like, you guys are smart. You guys are fine. This isn't, maybe I don't know everything at 18 years old. And so I start to open up a little bit, but still didn't embrace any kind of medicinal use. And that wasn't until I myself started having grand mal seizures in 2011, following a tornado. So I wasn't physically injured, but I did lose my apartment building was condemned. My car was totaled. And I'd had a really hard time. And so I started having grand mal seizures about 3 weeks afterwards. And they said they were stress induced. Basically just all that had happened. My little brain just said, can't handle it. And it also brought about some, actually helped us realize that I had a small epilepsy and so forth, because it just brought on by stress, triggered by stress. So
whoa, I have to just put a little pin in that, because I think there's a lot of misconception, right, for those people that maybe don't endure seizures, that to understand where some of those come from, and for us to understand that, severe stress and trauma doesn't have to look like physical pain in order to produce those same symptoms, right, of PTSD. And those are the things that we're kind of talking about. Is like when you put your body in a constant state of a fight or flight, you're constant,
Correct.
you don't know what's going to happen and you're in a fearful state. Those things start to manifest physically. And you're saying yours manifested in grand mal seizures.
And grand mal and they and the doctors were a bit floored by that. They this wasn't something that's very it's not very common, it's not very usual, but it can happen. And so they were PTSD induced seizures, is what they said I was suffering from. I was 20, just turned 21. And so they put me on everything that you would imagine. They put me on benzodiazepines, they put me on Keppra, because some benzos are considered anti-seizure medications. So they had me on Keppra, they had me on all of this. And not only did my seizures not go away, they started to increase with frequency and severity. So they started happening more frequent and started lasting longer, to where one happened around 10 minutes, called a static epileptic. So I couldn't get out of it. I kept going into the seizure and I had to be hospitalized overnight. And so I was really at my wit's end trying to figure this out, because I also was fired from my job because I kept having seizures at the job. And I understand, I was scaring people. So I was having, and I couldn't go to school. I couldn't do anything. I mean, truly. And
what does that do to the anxiety, to the depression, to the trauma? Do you know what I mean? It's just compounding.
It just made
compounding.
Yes. So of course the seizures got worse, and of course the medication's not working. And I'm like I said, I'm in Alabama. I'm kind of fighting for my life. That's truly what it felt like. And I grew up riding horses. That's my home, if you will, is being on a farm. And so I found a wonderful lady who was okay actually with me using cannabis. Like we talked about it, and I said, can I try this? Can I try to use it? And she was like, I don't care. Let's,
Had you done research, or you were just curious, or you were just like, I gotta try anything?
So I had smoked cannabis before, in college, not recreationally, but I did find that, I'm sorry, not medicinally, but what I considered recreationally. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that it helped anxiety and depression that most young college girls have, just that kind of thing. And so I knew that it had helped me, but I didn't really believe it. And then I think at that time, you had, what was that? Charlotte Figge. I think her story was starting to become a little bit known, and so it was starting to kind of come out. Like I said, CBD wasn't a thing. People were just now starting to talk about this being a use for seizures. And I believe that it was my 20-something-year-old friends that sat me down and were like, let's try this. What if you work with cannabis? And so we tried it, and it took us about 4 months to get them completely under control. And then I went all the way from 2000, I believe it was 2000, end of 2011 to 2016 without a seizure. And then I've been seizure free since 2016.
Wow. Right. So, amazing. Congratulations. Right. And that's not even right. That's what I love, is like, that's just one of the story, but
yes, it is
using that as a parallel to psychedelic industry. And that's because we're right there at that point, right? We remember back there. That's what I was even thinking. I'm like, man, just the last decade in cannabis has been so transformational. From where, you had to hide it, even though you're hiding it from the people who love you the most, would want the best for you, but they, you know what I mean? You know that they won't be able to understand. And there's a way that you feel like, oh, they would be happier if I were still enduring the pain and taking the traditional medicines than accepting that I've found, a plant-based, holistic, non-mainstream remedy. And it's just like, do you know what I mean? Like, how do we break that?
It took years. It wasn't even at the end of the seizures. That was not what tipped them over, to be frank. Like it took, because it's just, and this is in no shape, way, or form speaking ill of anyone around me. It's just how pervasive this line of thinking is. And I get it, because I was there. I just think I'm younger, and so I've had less time to have it ingrained in me. But it was it's been such an uphill battle, which is why I stayed quiet about it for almost a decade.
Right. And so then, that's what we want to say. And I feel like psychedelics are, yes, even deeper, with the stigmas that are around it and kind of the propaganda and the lies that are really kind of perpetuated because of the classification that's happened. Um, and
So
so, yeah, go
yes,
ahead.
no, and something that I'm getting to be a little bit more comfortable talking about, but it is with so I think that psychedelics and cannabis have an absolute overlap here. Like you said, they're in the beginning phases. We're still, especially in the nascent part, and you've got that stigma. But I think that cannabis is taking a lot of the the hard stuff on the chin, if you will. How can I say
Yeah.
this? They're taking the brunt of the argument, and I think they're really trailblazing the way for the psychedelic industry to come in and not have as much of an uphill battle if they stick with health and wellness.
I agree with you. I tend to agree. And that's why I think conversations like yours, where we can show a use case where, hey, now we're not talking psychedelics, right? But we're talking another drug that people classified the same way, that went through the same kind of stigmas, that here, once again, we're showing doesn't always, that the extreme cases don't necessarily look like what we think they will look like. And
Right.
so, saying that, yes, it could be our daughter, it could be our neighbor, it can be, our moms, our grandmothers that could benefit from the use of these compounds if we would just let go of, you know what I mean, the way that we're perceiving them. And so you talked about a use case that was, a sort of a mental, a brain, a chemical imbalance that was manifesting itself in physical symptoms, right?
Yes.
The next time you incur a similar scenario, but very different, is for actual, right, opioid dependency that was prescribed to you.
Correct. Correct.
And so many. I mean, I remember my grandmother developing an addiction to oxy after enduring cancer treatment. And it's like, why are those our choices? Do you know what I mean? Like that.
Oh,
And
absolutely. So that resulted in, so in my mid 20s, so I made it to, I had my financial career. So I was, at that time, I was at Morgan Stanley, and I was like a private banker hybrid between a broker and a private banker. So I had a very unique role, and I was all over Alabama, and I really loved it. But I started having, hemorrhagic ovarian cysts. So that was the physical condition that started what ended up being over 15 months, 17 hospitalizations, 6 major operations, and including the removal of almost all non-vital organs, except my spleen. I still have that. But most everything else had to be removed. And I was hospitalized twice for over a month each time. Both times nearly not making it. A couple of times the doctor coming in going, didn't think you were going to make it through the night, kind of a thing. And so I've been so I got really physically ill in my mid 20s, and I ended up having to resign from Morgan and resign basically any life. I had to quit riding my horses, except, just going out and basically petting them. And I was told my life was pretty much over at 26, and that I would be on I was prescribed 90 Percocets a month, for 3 of them a day at 10 milligrams each. I mean, so we're talking high doses, high amounts. And they said, this is only going to increase as you get older. And then of course they put me on all sorts of, I was in nearly a dozen medications, prescription medications. And, my quality of life was zero. I was mentally, physically, a complete and utter mess. And so it was after the very last the month-long hospitalization, I had been on, during the hospitalization, been prescribed IV Dilaudid every 3 hours, I've never done heroin, but I've been told that it's like legal heroin. That's kind of the colloquialism around it. And so legal heroin shot up every 3 hours. And the nurses were telling me that that my doses that I was getting were so high. They said they'd only given them to people that are 270 pounds, and I'm not 100 pounds soaking wet. So, extremely high doses, and then packing it on top of things. So I had a polypharmacy kind of a situation going on. And I get out of the hospital, and I had had enough. I had just had enough of it. And so I got myself an ounce of cannabis, and I got myself a whiteboard, and I wrote, and I made myself timetables, and I put myself into withdrawals and would call people for support to just while I was going through it, and using cannabis to try and blunt the withdrawals. I mean, it was one of the most horrific experiences of my life. 0 out of 10, do not recommend. It was awful, awful, awful. But in 10 days, I was able to get off of the Dilaudid, get off of the hardest Percocet, the hardest opiates, and using cannabis. And then over the next 3 years or so, I was able to wean off of each and every other medication. And was actually, and this is something I don't speak that much about just because I'm so narrowly in cannabis, but since we're in a psychedelics podcast, I'll explain this. So it was actually psychedelics that helped to break the mental addiction that I had. It was cannabis that allowed that, and continues to allow me to maintain a very high quality of life, where I'm able to be active, able to be athletic, able to hold, very high functioning jobs, high stress situations. But it was psychedelics that helped break that cycle, that mind shift that I needed, because I was never addicted to the high. I was never addicted to trying to feel a certain way. What I was in absolute terror of being in incapacitating pain. And because I had known I know what pain feels like. And that's what I was just petrified of. And so it was one psychedelic experience that I had, that I, very private setting, in a very, that kind of setting kind of a way. And that was my intention, was that I wanted to be healthier. I wanted to finally be healthy. And that's what helps set this whole mindset in order. And so it was truly after 3 full years of this, 3 to 5 years of this dependency, I was able to walk away from it. And so now I just use plants and plants in my cannabis. And that's the only medications that I'm on. And I'm living as healthy as I could, was able to get back to Wall Street even. Was before I started doing MyTEPI, I was running my own department at a hedge fund. So kind of beating all of the stereotypes of being stupid and lazy, even the ones that I so myself thought was associated with all of these substances. And that's why I've dedicated my whole, said goodbye to finance, threw myself into this. And I said, because people got to know, and they've got to have a way, to access it safely, reliably, confidently. And if I can do anything to help that, I have to. It's a must for me. And so this is as much of a life's passion and a mission as it is a career.
Yes, wonderful. And as powerful as that is, and as helpful as cannabis was, that was you toughing it out right in a room, with some phone support. And what's amazing is that some of these compounds, these psychedelic compounds, can help people break those opioid addictions without the withdrawal symptoms. And that, then you're really talking about decisions, because even you, who's sitting on the other side of addiction, says 0 out of 10, I wouldn't recommend.
Right.
You know
No,
I mean?
if I could have done that without that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's just the reality of it, right? But how do we make that not have to be a part of every survivor's story? Do you know what I mean? Because it's the fear. It's the fear of that pain. And you had to go through the pain. You had to say, I'm more scared of staying right there than going through it. And then there was pain. It wasn't once you got up the courage to not do it, then it was all, sunshine and roses. No, it was 10 days of intense pain. Whoa, right? And that's what, go ahead.
And even that, there was still pain after. So it was, but there was a mindset difference that I had. Instead of being fearful of the pain, I started to be able to look at it completely differently and go, this is just going to make me stronger. I can handle it. It's not going to kill me. I'm good. And so it made me just tougher in so many other ways. So it was, but it did start with the mindset. And yes, if we can make this to where people don't have to do this in such a secretive type of a setting, or in such a, flying by the seat of your pants, I think this is going to take but this can't be my personal opinion, it cannot be clinical. We can't have this like white lab coat, going in, sitting in a shrink kind of a thing. We're going to have to figure out a way of setting these sessions up, if you will, that are comfortable, that are helping people get over that hump of you're already terrified doing it. Even if you've done it before, you're scared almost every time you do this thing. That's why we call it a trip, because, and so it's having someone there, having this facilitated in a way that's safe, that minimizes the downside of, the downsides, but also, again, providing that access to get to the healing that can be associated with it. Because the other downs, just like with cannabis, if you're not doing this with the correct intentions, or I don't want to say the correct intentions, but if you're just doing this without intention, you're likely going to get a lackluster result that's very similar or worse, negative side effects or bad experience. And so these are because you're just not prepared for what's going to happen, be that a little paranoia from cannabis, or a full-blown staring into the abyss with a mushroom trip. So it just kind of, there's a spectrum there, but that's why I think that we do need to have that emphasis, and it's going to be dependent on the industry to, as you said in the very beginning, yes, there can be money made in this. Like I said, I come from Wall Street. All right. I understand the need to make money. But what I've also understood is that if you do things right, if you do things by the truth of the essence of what you're doing. So the truth and the essence of psychedelics, cannabis, what have you, is healing. So if you nail the healing, if you get that right, the money will come.
Right.
It always does. It'll all come in. And so you don't have to worry about, just get the product right. Steve Jobs knew that. Just get the product right, get the service right, and the money will come. And I think if we can have that type of attitude towards it, we can create an industry that doesn't get hijacked by big pharma, that doesn't get hijacked by some alphabet soup agencies, but can actually be held by the people that understand it, that are driven by the people, that are driven by the potential here, and not simply by profits or getting there first.
Yeah. And I think that that's what it's going to have to be, right? Because unfortunately, the big machines are concerned with scalability. And the reason why most are not going to be super excited to, legalize and make available a lot of these compounds is because they are about healing, right? And then that means we won't have repeat customers, so I can't do the projections. If everyone that comes in never has to come back, well, I got to always find new people. And so you got to break the system at its heart, and it's going to have to be from us, from the people that know the benefits, have experienced the benefits either firsthand or through a loved one, that says, hey, not anymore are you going to tell me my only remedy is palliative care, is to just mask the symptoms and trade one malady for a whole host of side effects that then have to come with their own medications. Like, no, right? We have to say enough is enough. And we want the opportunity to experience things that are of nature, most first and foremost,
Yes, that's it. I mean, because these, I had the thing that's fascinated me the most in studying this, and doing truly nothing but studying the science as much as I can without being a scientist, trying to understand our relationship with plants, there's the theory of us co-evolving basically to benefit each other, to kind of have a symbiotic relationship. And if we look at our multi-million year history with these plants, with cannabis, our ECS and everything, it starts in mushrooms, and again, not even just psychedelic mushrooms, but the whole host of therapeutic uses and medicinal uses with these types of compounds that nature seems to have figured out much better than we have in the past 100 years in the lab. And I'm not one to say that pharmaceuticals should be entirely replaced by nature. I actually don't believe that. I believe that pharma has its time and its place. But how I like to say it is that nature is that's what I think is our more prophylactic, our daily, the thing that you actually would be using on a more habitual basis. And then pharmaceuticals are a bit more for a manual override when your body just needs that kind of like restart button, and it needs that because it's getting a little over its head. That's when I think pharmaceuticals are great, but it's understanding where that fit is. And I think I think it's going to take decades, frankly, but over the next few decades, I believe that we really are going to get to a point where we're going to start seeing a lot more holistic medicine, and not from like the hippie voodoo sense, but in a very science evidence-based sense where people are experiencing real help. We're starting to understand bioavailability. We're starting to understand the entourage effect, actually starting to being able to prove this, with the Johns Hopkins studies and so forth. So the science is catching up to what the anecdotal has been saying for, frankly, thousands of years around these medicinal uses. But I think that in our technical world, in our hyper scientific world, we're going to have that up there with us to be validating this anecdotal evidence, because the anecdotal has been there all along and it hasn't been enough. So we're going to have to be able to have this is what it does, this is where it is, and this is how it's going to affect you, I think, to really get this out to the masses, and not just, in this kind of niche 10 to 20% of the population partaking in it.
And I love it. And that's basically the company that you've created. We're working to be able to do that in psychedelics, right? Where someone could come in and say, like, hey, this is what your experience. Well, this is the compound that's right for you. This is, what you can expect from it, and have this really, a really user-friendly system towards their path of healing. And that's what you've done for cannabis, right? That you're really trying, right, to help.
That's what we're trying to do.
Tell me about that. Yeah.
It is what we're definitely trying to do. And that wasn't even an on-purpose segue, but it just kind of went in great. So yes, it's that is what we are trying to do at MyTEPI is so we have created a system that essentially takes the data from the COA, the certificate of analysis. That's the lab data that, depending on where you're located, but in Nevada, where we're headquartered, it's mandatory that you have full panel testing. So it's not just for that's not just for heavy metals and pesticides, but also for terpenes and cannabinoids. So when we're able to have the terpenes and the cannabinoids, we're able to deduce what the most likely, and this isn't going to be for everyone because everyone's physiology is different, of course, but the most likely pharmacological effect, and we've deduced it down to 4 effects, and based on that plant's biochemical makeup. And so that way you're not having to go in and basically become an amateur botanist, pharmacologist, and psychologist and everything else, but that you can just go in and go, I need something to help me with rest. I need something to help with my shoulder pain. And you'll be able to select it's not really a strain. That's a misnomer. It kills me. So that's actually a fun little note. There's no such thing as a cannabis strain. Yes, we call them that. Strains are only existent in viruses and bacteria. They're actually called chemovars. I'm gonna have my little science nerd moment. But that is something that's how we're able to distinguish between the different products. And if you've ever been in a dispensary, you're sometimes inundated with hundreds of products with very varying effects. And your bud tender, your cannabis consultant may or may not know what those effects are, and the labels may or may not correlate. So like sativa and indica, sorry industry, they're complete nonsense, and everyone in the industry knows they're nonsense. Yes, they have a very low correlation to actually what they're supposed to describe, if it being sleepy or up here. Yeah, it's nonsense. It doesn't mean anything. But it's all that we've got to go with. And so the industry's like, well, we just can't do anything about it. And so I said with my partner, we've got to do something about it, because it's actually, again, what's hindering that wider adoption of this plant that I think can help so many people. Because if you're, first of all, indica sativa, you don't know what that means. And if you're being explained to already faulty information about a product that you're already not so keen on, like it's bad from
Yeah.
every way you look at it. So we are trying to appeal to the customer by being as authentic and transparent as humanly possible, in saying, look, this is what we have interpreted from the data. This is what and we've developed an algorithm to be very, very sensitive to each and every chemical component and how it interacts with the body through something called pharmacokinetics. And so we're actually trying to map this out as scientifically as possible to, again, be validated anecdotally. And if we don't get it right, we want to know. Like, we want, if we are saying that a particular product is going to help put you to sleep, and it doesn't put you to sleep, we want to be the first to know that that this didn't happen. And because then we get to go back to the drawing board and go, okay, did we miss something, or is this an exception to the rule? And then we're approaching it scientifically. And I think that's the type of credibility that the cannabis industry desperately needs in order to reach wider adoption. And the psychedelic industry would be very, very, they would behoove themselves, as the English would say, to be paying attention, and I think to follow in suit, because it's that trust, it's that transparency. My favorite thing was working with wine moms, saying that they want to try cannabis, but they don't want to go into the stores, or if they go into the store, they wear big glasses because they're like scared that they're going to be seen by like they still feel dirty. That's the bottom line. And so if we can help make them feel more comfortable, more confident, and just overall feel better about their purchases, I think more and more people will come into this, see the benefits, and then psychedelics is just, it's that next step to healing, in my opinion, and an exit out. I don't think these are gateways; these are exits out of a certain
100%.
system.
I love that. I love that you said that. Exactly. We're exiting out of this life of, addiction and trauma and debilitating treatment resistant, like depression and anxiety. So,
and looking at yourself as that, and identifying yourself, going, I have anxiety, so we often go, I have anxiety, but how we really are meaning it is, I am anxiety. And it goes, no, this is something we can deal with. It's something we can confront head on. Anxiety, depression, these things, we don't have to become our weaknesses. We can deal with them and we can confront them. And I think that these are the substances that can really, used correctly, can absolutely do that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Livi. This was a great conversation. I know my mind was shifted around a few things, just even, hearing you talk. I love that it's not a gateway, it's an exit. I'm going to use that one.
Feel free.
For all of you listening, where are you at? Can they sign up? Can they use MyTEPI? Should they sign up for a mailing list? How can they get in touch with you?
So our website is currently, or app website is currently under development. It's going to be coming out in the next couple of months. So please go to mytepi.com, leave us your information, get on our mailing list. We're going to be coming out with some pretty cool stuff in the next couple of weeks. So, and also if you want to follow me on Twitter at Livi McKay, I do a lot of updates there as well.
Wonderful. And remember, if you are part of the psychedelic community or you're excited to enter the psychedelic community, make sure that you're claiming your free profile through withnucleus.com. We really sit at the intersection of entrepreneurs, therapists, end users, and just the opportunity, the education and information that it's going to take to create mass adoption of the psychedelic industry, especially starting with the medicinal and healing purposes. So thank you again. I'm your host, Margaret Williamson, Head of Partnerships at Nucleus, and we look forward to seeing you guys again for another mind-shifting moment soon. Take care.